Hi, it's me, Imogen. Since I haven't uploaded since last year, I thought I would just do an overview of books that I have read this year, as I haven't reviewed any yet. Um, I won't talk about every single book, but I will talk about most of them, and I will begin with talking about the books that I enjoyed the least. The first book that I am going to mention is The Belly of Paris by Émile Zola. I feel kind of guilty beginning this list with a book by one of my favorite authors of all time. Um, I wouldn't say that there is a book that I've read by him that I completely disliked. I will say that initially, but I am working through his 20 book cycle, um, and this is probably the most boring I have read yet. I often find that especially with 19th century literature, the synopsis doesn't always capture the energy that the book is going to have. And I've learned not to judge all books by the plot they supposedly have, and rather the way it's written, the characters, and the atmosphere, as well as historical context usually being quite interesting to me. So I went into this thinking that, aside from it being a book about food primarily, there'd probably be more underneath that, in typical Zola fashion. Unfortunately, the descriptions of food, and the kind of not overly compelling characters dragged it down for me majorly. It's thankfully not a very long book, but I mean, it was humorous. I laughed at some lines. He really is good at his characterization. However, it just wasn't enough to carry a whole novel for me. Um, so by the end, I kind of just wanted it to be over. Sad to say. The next book um, on the list is, and I apologize for my horrendous pronunciation, is Baise-moi by Virginie Despentes. Um, I have read the first of her um, series of fiction books that she published, I think, in the 2010s. Um, and I enjoyed the first one. Um, and I understand it's very different in nature to this book. But yeah, I mean, good sides, it had a quite cinematic feel. I like books that do things that I'm not used to reading. I like new things, new approaches, and new ideas, um, new styles, even if it's not always for me. I will give it that, but I don't know. I think it's supposed to be shocking. Like that's the point. So I guess it achieves that, but it's just becomes kind of a slog for me after a while. The characters were interesting at the start and kind of became less compelling to me. There were some highlights, and cool scenes that I thought were kind of entertaining, but at the same time, uh, I think like gratuitous violence and brutality isn't it's just not really that interesting to me. Um, it lacked something. Um, and I just generally I don't like things that are just horrible for the sake of being horrible. So it wasn't ideal. But if you don't mind and you like things to be as horrible as possible and kind of amusing and just sort of over the top, then it's probably the kind of book that you should read. On a similar note, I read The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. That was the first book I read this year, I think, right after Christmas, as I felt it kind of fit in. And I've been meaning to read it for years of my life. Um, so it was kind of overdue. Unfortunately, I was mostly disappointed. I like Gothic media generally. I'm not as big into Gothic literature. It's not really gripped me as much for some reason. Um, but I can appreciate aspects of it. I like the descriptions. I like spooky settings. I like vampires and creepy stuff. and like a dark, heavy atmosphere. But I have to say, I mean, feminism in literature is kind of, a rough, it could be a controversial topic. And I, I've, I know it's regarded as like a feminist piece of writing, literature. Um, but I reckon that's mostly because a woman wrote it and not because of what it's saying. Maybe I'm wrong and I'm missing something, but I think through that lens, I read it maybe in too critical of a way. I mean, aside from the aesthetics and the atmosphere, which I enjoyed, I found a bit too much of it was just about women giving themselves up to monstrous creatures and that kind of being the end. And it doesn't feel like there was much more being said aside from that. It kind of just rubbed me the wrong way. It was sort of unsatisfying. But through primarily more a horror aspect, that side of it was good. So maybe I'm just not reading it correctly, but that was my experience. On the theme of short stories, I also read the collection Record of a Night Too Brief by Hiromi Kawakami. I read Strange Weather in Tokyo by Kawakami, which I enjoyed a lot. It was quite charming and it had a sort of feel to it that I just vibed with a lot. Um, and I saw this book and I saw it was supposed to be kind of surreal and strange, and I thought it would be maybe my kind of surreal and strange, but it wasn't. Um, I found it again just a bit too weird in the sense of being weird for weird's sake, and I couldn't really hold on to anything or even really understand what was going on for any of the stories, save for maybe one. Like there was one about ghosts or something that I quite liked, but the rest I just didn't really care for. Aside from aesthetics being kind of intriguing, the bulk of the stories just didn't connect with me at all. And if I can't connect with something at all and it's not entertaining, then I just find it kind of dull. So that's sort of what happened. But I will read more of her books eventually. So I feel it's just so far removed from her novels, maybe, that it just is a sort of one off type of thing. Lastly, of the books that didn't really impress me so far this year, is probably the most controversial book to not be in praise of. And again, I don't want to talk too badly about it because it is by possibly my favorite author ever. And it is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. This is another book that I've been meaning to read like my whole life. And I do wonder if waiting too long sometimes is to the detriment of the book because my expectations are too high. I originally began it years ago and didn't finish and restarted this year. When I began it originally, I was enjoying it, but for some reason, continuing it now, I didn't very much. There were aspects that I appreciated and liked, and I think this now the plot is incredibly, important and relevant and should exist. I'm glad the book exists. But in terms of my reading it and my personal enjoyment divorced from everything else, it just didn't really work too well. I get that the way it's written is not kind of a normal type of storytelling, um, and it's deliberate, but I just didn't really find it very compelling. I felt that the situation could be explored in a much more interesting way than it was. It felt very kind of matter of fact and um, detached, which I understand is completely the point. I just, for some reason, didn't really enjoy it. I didn't feel engaged. Towards the end, I didn't really care what was happening. I just wanted to know the ending, and that was pretty much it. But the middle part, I just kind of grew distant from. I have the Testaments, which I'll read eventually. Maybe it'll be more enjoyable for me. But yeah, I don't know. Aside from my appreciation of the book as a whole, I didn't really love reading it, unfortunately. Lastly, I have two more novels and a novella which I did in fact enjoy. The first of those is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Brontë. I kind of didn't enjoy this book for most of it. The middle sections where she's kind of recalling or describing in her diaries her relationship with, I can't remember his name, the her ex-husband, I guess you can call him, and his descent into alcoholism and just being an abusive, terrible guy to her. I didn't think it was all badly written. It's just it kind of went on a bit much when I really got the point. And I understand that the main character is like a sympathetic woman and she's a really good woman, and that's kind of part of the whole point. But it's kind of like the point being kind of pushed too repetitively about the fact she's so good that she'll just keep forgiving him. It got kind of tiresome. That being said, I did enjoy it a lot by the end. Anne Bronte's kind of writing is a bit dry for my taste. I love Charlotte Bronte, and the real passion that's in her writing. I really love with Anne Bronte. The passion wasn't as much there, but it was still very well written, and a story that should be told. I think for its time, and it's quite a sweet love story, I would say, in some regards. Um, Taken just as a piece of fiction and not you know, not delved too deeply into, maybe. Next is my favorite novel that I've read this year, um, that I really enjoyed pretty much from start to finish, and that was Fathers and Sons by Turgenev. I was originally going to do a video just about this book, but then felt it's just there's so much context and weight to it. I didn't really feel like I could do it justice to an entire review on it. But I just really, really enjoyed reading it. I mean, it's not very long. I don't think it it's like the perfect uh length for such a story. It could have even been a little bit longer. But I really enjoyed the protagonist, Bazarov, and pretty much all the characters. There was something about them that I really liked and felt was interesting. I cared about pretty much everyone in the book. Um, of course, there's more focus on the men, in the narrative, but I still felt the women weren't too like they weren't pure plot devices. There was stuff going on with them that I felt found really interesting. It just covered so many kind of timeless topics and ideas and lines of thought, and I just really heavily connected with it. I also just enjoyed like the setting of it, and all the little tiny details that he picks up on with the characters. Events aren't like overblown, they're just kind of they feel oddly realistic, and sort of down to earth, which I really connected with. So I will be definitely reading more of his books in the future. Lastly, what kind of brought me on to reading Turgenev was reading the novella Reading Turgenev by William Trevor, who I really love. Um, there's so much I could say about this novella. Again, I heavily connected with it. I found it tremendously sad and tragic and kind of strange and uncomfortable, but like horribly human. Um, I feel it's kind of the best kind of story to sort of just go into and let it just be what it is. I mean, it can be picked apart heavily, and maybe it should be, but I just think being what it is with its sort of hint of magic and uh, tragedy, it's really powerful. And again, as I was saying with Turgenev himself, like the way William Trevor writes characters is so empathetic and multidimensional. He can write about women just as well as he can write about men. He writes things that make me think like, wow, he understands people. He knows what it is to be a human, and in such a sensitive way. It comes through so wonderfully in his writing. It's a really special little story, which I definitely recommend. Um, and it just makes me want to get back to reading his books again, um, more. So, yeah, that was a selection of things I've read so far this year. I know most of it was very negative. I don't go into books trying to be negative. It's just I had bad luck so far, I think. and I can't force myself to like things that I just don't vibe with. So I apologize that it wasn't very um, positive uh, as I would like it to be. I hope you enjoyed listening to me ramble nonetheless, and I hope you have read better books, maybe, or enjoyed books much more so far this year. Thank you for watching.